The United States government just deported a 2-year-old American citizen with an American birth certificate and American father to Honduras. The mother had a deportation order. They got rounded up in an immigration raid. The father wanted to keep the child and even filed court paperwork to keep the child. The U.S. government forced the mother to sign a piece of paper saying that she wanted to take the child with her. Why do we think that the government forced the child? Well, here's two good reasons. They would only allow a 1-minute phone call between the father and the mother. 1-minute phone call. That's not enough time to discuss the future of your child. And it's also like a human rights violation. Why is it that this mother can't talk to the husband of her child when they've got an American citizen's future on the line? 2, the judge, a Trump-appointed federal judge, said to the government while the plane was in the air, he said, I know the plane's in the air, get the plane on the phone, give me the mother on the line right now. That was at 12 p.m. The government called back at 1, enough time to get the plane on the ground and get the woman off the plane, and they said, oh, sorry, we really want you to talk to this woman, but unfortunately we've already let her off the plane, and how could we have any way of contacting her now? Okay, and the judge was like, okay, well, I'll tell you what, I don't care for that, and we're going to keep talking about this. So they've got a Trump-appointed judge really upset. The federal government has deported a 2-year-old American child, folks.
In a stunning development, a federal judge has revealed that the Trump administration deported a 2-year-old U.S. citizen with no meaningful process. The little girl, known only as VML in court documents, was removed from the country alongside her mother, sparking outrage and a legal battle to bring her home. Judge Terry Doughty called the deportation illegal and unconstitutional, scheduling a hearing to investigate further. The case highlights a growing concern. Even documented immigrants and citizens are being swept up in an aggressive crackdown, often without due process. VML's father, fighting for her return, heard her cries during a brief phone call before her deportation. Yet Trump officials argue that because the child is with her mother, who chose to take her to Honduras, there's no harm being done. Civil rights groups fiercely disagree, calling it a shocking abuse of power. As the Trump administration pushes to reshape immigration policies, experts warn that even U.S. citizens are no longer immune from questionable deportations, raising serious constitutional alarms across the country.
The Trump-Musk administration has already deported a U.S. citizen, a 2-year-old. An innocent 2-year-old U.S. citizen has been deported. I know that slippery slope arguments are often just inherently flawed, but this is not one of those times. Donald Trump has been crystal clear for 10 years about who he'd like to deport. It was just days ago that from the White House, in front of cameras, Donald Trump was talking about how he wanted to deport, quote, homegrown criminals, U.S. citizens who he wanted to strip of due process and the rights of citizenship guaranteed in our Constitution and the 14th Amendment of it. And now here we are, with a U.S. citizen, a 2-year-old, very clearly not a criminal, who has been stripped of the rights of citizenship. A federal judge, a conservative federal judge, has determined that the due process rights of this 2-year-old U.S. citizen were violated, in that there was no meaningful process. The father of this U.S. citizen filed an emergency petition to the court, because the mother was going through an expedited deportation. Now, the mother, not a U.S. citizen, was stripped of due process rights. And I know that MAGA is certainly not going to be sympathetic to that, even if they should be, because the Constitution is for everyone who is in the United States. Due process rights are for everyone in the United States. But we have crossed a line that the so-called pro-life party should be up in arms about. When a 2-year-old U.S. citizen, very clearly not a criminal, someone born in the United States, is deported without the right to due process, we have entered new territory that even MAGA swore we would never cross. And for additional context on how ridiculous is, the conservative federal judge who wrote about this wrote that he feared that the plane was already above the Gulf of America. Those are the words that he used. When you have a federal judge who is willing to adopt the language of the fascists in renaming things that cannot be renamed like that, a judge who is willingly and freely using the language of a fascist. My point is not to make you feel hopeless. It is simply to let you know what is going on and to empower you to make change. This is a red line that many members of Congress and of the Senate said would never be crossed, even the MAGA contingent. If this conservative federal judge is willing to stand up for the rights of this U.S. citizen, this conservative federal judge from Louisiana ought to be giving the political capital and space and coverage that members of the House and Senate who are even MAGA aligned, that they would need to stand up to Donald Trump and ensure that this U.S. citizen is brought home and given the right to due process. Because if the Trump administration can strip due process rights from a 2-year-old U.S. citizen, so could any administration following it.
They deported a 2-year-old child. Not a statistic. A baby. A U.S. citizen. Deported. Alone unto the unknown. Now, I believe in January I was complaining about how these parents are not watching their kids. And, people came back at me with saying, oh, I'm being ridiculous. No, it wasn't. Because now there's receipts. Google is free. You can Google the child was deported with no due process, no trial, no mercy, no sanctuary. And if they can erase a child born here, what makes them think they won't erase you too?
Let's rewind. Not just the news, but the history books of this country. In the 1930s, over 1 million people in this country of Mexican descent were forcibly removed. Many of them were United States citizens. We now know it as Mexican reparations. Our country told them they didn't belong. Citizenship did not protect them then. It's not protecting her now. During Japanese internment, citizens born in American soil were rounded up and imprisoned because of their blood, their family, and their otherness. All this overruled their rights. And we swore, never again. History doesn't whisper, it echoes. The government is allowed to disregard the rights of a 2-year-old. It isn't just an error, it's a test balloon. Small injustice to see what the public will tolerate. To see if the constitutional protections are still sacred. Or just conditional. VML isn't a headline. She's a warning. Because if the rights of the most innocent among us, babies born on American soil, can be erased without consequence, whose rights will be next? This isn't about borders, this is about boundaries. The moral ones we keep crossing. The legal ones we stop defending. And the human ones we forget to see. The past is not behind us. It's rhyming again. Are we listening? We cannot let this go quietly, because if we do, she will not be the last.
A U.S. citizen, not just an immigrant, not just an undocumented immigrant, not a criminal, not somebody who is here illegally, but a U.S. citizen who is 2 years old. I have a 2-year-old son. He's the person you hear in the background. And if anybody ever tried to touch him, tried to deport him, I don't know what I would do with myself. And if you support a 2-year-old U.S. citizen, a child who cannot defend themselves, being stripped from their home, then you are not pro-life and you are not pro-Constitution. This country can be the greatest country in the world. But if we keep doing things like this, deporting our own citizens who are children, we are nowhere near the best country. We are the worst country in the world.
What we are seeing is a stark resemblance to some of the darkest times in human history. When this reminds us of 1930s Germany, or when this reminds us of transatlantic slavery and where parents and children were forcibly separated, then you know there's an issue. It's not just a legal issue. This is a moral issue.
They were held and deported fairly quickly, and ICE is saying that the mother wanted the daughter to come with. Now the father, who is a U.S. citizen, is saying that's not the case. He was not allowed to communicate properly or intervene properly with, like, his ex-partner. And it's kind of weird, right? Because in this country, if you take your kid across state lines without alerting the other parent, it can be considered kidnapping, let alone a whole other country.
So they're deporting 2-year-olds now. And they've got children representing themselves in court. Children as young as 4 years old representing themselves in court without a lawyer, without anybody present to represent them. This is wild.
When are we going to speak up to these horrible abuses that are being perpetrated upon marginalized communities in our country? America has become a fascist country under Trump in less than 100 days. It is time that we start speaking up for our brothers and our sisters who are being sent overseas, being deported without any due process. These are American citizens.
It is illegal to deport United States citizens, and people who are born in the United States are United States citizens.